I know teachers right now are into their 40s who are still paying college loans off.
The people that aren't in education complain about what we're not doing in education. You're like, all right, so the people that are doing cool stuff, you almost have borderline a moral obligation to say, all right, this is what I'm doing then.
Let me ask you a very quick question. Is it easier to get a passport than it is to substitute teach?
Yep. Like, be lazy. Well, if I'm training people to be teachers, be lazy. Yeah, shut up and let them do it.
There's two emotions that I straddle, right? Is hope and worry. So I'm worried to death about kids, but I'm super hopeful about the future.
Education wants the instant gratification. They want the weeds. They don't want the trees.
CTE is coming gangbusters for the traditional, practitioners who don't want to even entertain moving things around for the sake of efficacy.
Do we need as much time as we need to do school?
I mean, if you're asking a 14-year-old, they're going to tell you a weekend will be fine. But no, I want to challenge kids.
If you're about to listen to this podcast, buckle up.
You're listening to the Disrupt Education Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Hostrasser and Ali Dahl.
Welcome to the Disrupt Education Podcast. Peter Hostrasser, that's Ali Dahl. What's up, Ali? How you doing?
I'm great. It's a pretty big day. The day we're recording this will come out just not too long from now, but this marks we're recording this on what is the traditional start of the school year, the day after Labor Day. So that gives you some context of when we're recording this. And the traditional model, and I was so interesting. I was talking with my family last night about well, why do they start school after Labor Day? And obviously some school districts start school earlier now and whatnot, but that, they're talking about back in the farming times and kids had to be home for the summer to help out on the farm and, or whatever reason, industry, stuff like that. And it just had this kind of dialogue of, well, do people all start school at this time? And then we went into year-round school and we were kind of talking about different models. And people were like, well, why do we still do it this way? And, but you've got all the back to school, excitement, joy. We actually had our guest that's on it coming back around this time last year. And so, there's this start of the school year buzz, but it kind of the conversation left me wanting. I wanted to dive deeper, but the kids maybe weren't ready to hear. So what to share anyway, that's what's going on.
I like the farming, and we're going to bring up silos, just FYI. That's my farming tip for the day. We have Scott Carr with us, CESA 2, football extraordinaire. I can keep going, man. Scott, tell us, remind our audience a little bit about yourself. And you know what? You had that interesting story about you were the original not buying what school's selling as a youngster, right. And then kind of, weave that into where we're going today, my friend.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me back on the show. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a long time ago, but I can remember it well. I was certainly not buying what the school was selling back in the day. And yeah, I think it's relevant. I grew up in a family where I had two older brothers. My father was a over-the-road truck driver, worked very hard. My mother was a waitress and worked weekends at the supper clubs, if you would. Wisconsin's very popular for supper clubs. And yeah, my two older brothers did very well, and I sat back and kind of shook my head, and I just could not, invest myself in the school system. I couldn't find relevance. I really wasn't interested at a very young age. And so as I went through the school system, I did end up graduating, obviously. I probably was not in the top 50% of my class. And my father looked at me and said, well, now do you want to drive truck or go to college? And I certainly didn't want to drive a truck, so I chose option number 2 and went to college and spent a lifetime there, I think, too. And actually, the truth behind it, I have. I've been in education ever since. I think I was fortunate. I was able to play a sport in college. It kept me enrolled. It kept me engaged. I eventually found my purpose. I became a special education teacher where I started in the inner city of Milwaukee and really, really understood, what it takes to, build relationships, not only, in the organization itself, but with students. And I often say I could easily get them to the finish line, but once they got there and they exited, I hated seeing them back out in the street and not really having a purpose and not being able to succeed. So I put a lot of effort and work in the 20 years that I was a special education teacher to connect students to career readiness, community engagement, civic engagement activities, and it really paid off. And as I progressed through the educational system, eventually getting a leadership degree and multiple other master's degrees, which I would have never thought I would have done back in the day, I noticed one thing, one trending thing was the educational system for a lot of our students, it was very much the same thing as the students I started working with. They just, right now we're seeing such high levels of disengagement of our students, high levels of chronic absenteeism, and our students just are not buying what we're selling. They're just not interested. So, yeah, I eventually found myself, the last 3 years, I've worked for a great organization in CESA 2. We're a collaborative agency in our state. We're one of 12. We do a great job of innovative thinking, and I'm supported by just a great leadership team and a lot of colleagues that just let me stretch my wings and do a lot of this work, not only in our region but in our state, and it's starting to grow a lot of interest, in our Midwest region and also in the U.S. Because of the uniqueness of what we're doing at CESA 2. So, yeah,
It's
it's been a
leveling up.
journey.
He's leveling up, Allie,
I
going
know.
like transformative leadership change.
Hmm.
He definitely is. And, you know, last year when we had you on, you really talked a lot about purpose and gave Peter and I and our listeners a lot to think about. I've had many conversations about your podcast from last year, from listeners, and they're like, Scott is very insightful with this idea of purpose and where does it come from, and you're very open about your own journey, and I think that's why it's so relatable. Um, and I'm curious, even in the last year, have you thought more about, what the purpose of your work, and or just the purpose of school? Because that was the question you posed last year. It was so powerful. And I'm just curious, you have got another year of doing this work with CESA 2 and, all of your life experience, what would you kind of add to that to kind of kick off this episode?
Yeah, it definitely is the foundation of where I enter into school districts when we do the work. Asking, right away, we lead with, what is the fundamental purpose of an educational system? I mean, ultimately, that's the foundation. When we ask ourselves to really dive deeper into, what is our why? Why do we exist? Doesn't take long for us to understand and come to the conclusion that we're not really, meeting our purpose. Because one of the glaring pieces that we often tend to see is that our students don't see their purpose in the system. When you say they're not buying what they're selling, there's a lot of research and data out there identifying the level of a lack of engagement our students are showing within our classrooms. And so I use it in a combination, one, to bring the understanding of why there's a need for a shift. So that a lot of the times is where we talk about, do our students know their purpose? And it's not so much that they have to dial in, intentfully to something very concrete. But boy, I tell you, one of the things I've recognized in the last year of doing this work, the last 3, 4 years, is I don't think that they understand their purpose in general a lot of the times. And if they do see the purpose, it's generally a compliance-based type of recognition on their behalf, chasing credits, chasing a grade point, trying to reach an end goal of graduation. And when you ask students, what is your purpose? One, they struggle around identifying what it is. A lot of the times they'll re-ask, or they'll ask you to clarify what you mean. And when you dive in a little deeper, they'll give you a response that is directly related to achievement.
Mm.
Right to the point of saying, I'm in this class for this reason, and rarely is it related to anything purposeful in relationship to preparing themselves for future readiness,
Yeah.
which ultimately I think our system should be geared towards job readiness, career readiness, and future readiness. But that conversation leads us into the aha moment of, well, are we really striving for the right things and doing the right things within our system? And ultimately, again, we have a conversation in depth around what is the fundamental purpose of an educational system. So that really is the starting point.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
So, I had the pleasure of working with Scott on a couple of different areas in different places throughout the Midwest. But yeah, let's start there. You have this revisioning. I like it at the level of where real change can happen. I think a lot of our guests, we can go into like different areas and talk about what you just talked about, right? Like kind of speak to the fact that yeah, our kids are not, they're coming in, they have more and more distractions, they have all different kinds of things, and we're in a very stagnant system. One thing that I really enjoyed about, watching you work is the kind of the reculturing of an entire building, an entire district, kind of like unpack that. Like where do you,
Mm.
it's easy as an educator to do it in a classroom, but for an entire school or entire department within a school, go there, man. Like what are some of the things that you've started and are continuing to see in helping others in that transformative leadership?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is um, this has exploded in my world. It's a lot of people reach out, a lot of people show an interest because of the obvious reasons. Those pain points. Obviously, there's the one of our students that are really, they lack engagement in the educational system. But most importantly, some of the statistical data that we have out there regarding sending our students on to college, that college for all kind of mentality. And we're graduating students that are lagging in those durable skills that they need. And so that's the obvious, usually what makes my phone ring when people reach out. The tough part is, though it really has gained a lot of traction, not a lot of schools are ready and or
Mm.
prepared to take this on. Yeah, I look at it as, once I get in, a couple things generally will happen. One is, which I think is the best piece, is yeah, let's do this. It's met with a lot of enthusiasm. They want to know what the it is right away, and I say that's a discovery process. It'll take us a year, maybe longer. And if you're not willing to take that amount of time to discover your own why and what this should be within your own community, then we're not ready. So there's a lot of excitement out of those that will engage right away. Then there's the individuals or the districts, and generally it's a leadership team that I'm meeting with, superintendents, building leaders, directors, and they'll say we just aren't ready for it. Our educators are not ready for this type of a transformational shift. And that honesty is really, worthy. And within time, we generally will come back together and we'll find an opportunity. And then there is the third, which I don't see often, but where people don't recognize it as needed. And that to me, with my personality and really being a disruptor That's oil water. It's just not going to match. But there are some out there that really see our educational system as a system that's meant to, hold academic achievement at the highest level of accountability.
Mm,
Um, but when we get into this, one of the first things before we even start to talk about, what is your purpose, I bring up revisioning, reimagining, and reorganizing. And I help them understand that if you're going to make a commitment to this, you need to be vocal around that. Not right away, not right up front, because that's just going to have a reaction that's not going to be positive. But over the course of a year, there's a lot of strategic attempts that we intentionalize as we move forward with this work. That there will be moments to be able to identify what that process really looks like. And one of the things I've learned in the last year, specifically with some really key school districts diving into this, is that reorganizing really ends up being just reshifting some of the what you're already doing. So you can't just look at reorganizing. Reimagining means you have to be good at discovery and really creating environments and opportunities within your community, not just your school, where people can discover what school needs to be, what school could be, but more importantly, what school needs to be. When you get into the revisioning portion of it, you really are then looking at the process of how do you reculture, your school system. And the reculturing piece of this has really been the foundation that I've seen where we've had school districts really advance the most. That is really having those tough conversations, not looking for a playbook up front, but
mhm.
being willing to go through a process that allows them to discover what it needs to be. We don't work well as educators without a playbook, without a blueprint. And that's one of our biggest issues that we've created in our system is always asking for the playbook. And I come across that a ton in that first year and a half of the work I'm doing with school districts.
Immediately with you saying that, I'm thinking, I bet you've heard, let's not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is in order to do the work that you're talking about, you actually have to throw out the wheel because you can't look at what your neighbors are doing because what your neighbors are doing isn't what this community potentially needs. Like, so it seems like it's really localized or really, this specific school, this community versus the community down the road might have a completely different outcome in the discovery process. But I mean, I know I've said that when I've, been teaching, or been in situations, I'm like, well, let's not reinvent the wheel. Like somebody else has to be doing this already. So let's just take it from their playbook and like apply it here. So why do you see that as an important
Mhm.
distinction in helping with the work that you do in this reimagining, reorganizing, revisioning process? Because that's different.
Yeah, I do get it a lot. Some of those that will question, the work in general will say, well, this is project-based learning in classrooms, or this is UDL or a lot of different educational jargons that they want to apply to the work itself. And I don't think it's that at all because I say you really have to flip the coin. One of the first things I'll say to leaders when we talk about leadership behavior, because one of the coaching points that I help with is how to lead differently,
Mm,
how to truly understand transformational leadership. And one of the simplest pieces that I offer is just do the opposite.
Mhm.
And that really ends up grabbing some attention, if you would. Sometimes people get a little agitated at it because they
yep.
want to lean into what best practice is. And
Yep.
one of the things I like to say about best practice is that's something that's happened in the past. I mean, I get it. We do want to have evidence of success, but what we're looking at doing is something that doesn't exist. And so really we are going to create the best practice moving forward. I like your previous guest, Gary Skeen, had said it's not about best practice, it's next practice. And there's so much truth to and that's hard for educators, especially those that are behind the wheel, to accept, to be able to say, well, I'm going to be questioned by my board. I've got a state report card that I'm held accountable to. So I'm constantly going to be asked, what is best practice, and are we providing that, and are we doing that? And, one of the things that I've heard some of the superintendents that I work with, um, uh, Brian Henning, superintendent at Waterloo School District, just did this last week in front of his staff. He asked, is what we're currently doing working?
Hmm.
And I'll ask that question a lot of the times when we start having conversation around, what is that best practice? Because the information that that our students are providing us is that it's not working. Now, academically, potentially with that, some of the best practices really hone in, and they're practical, and they're resources we should definitely lean into and use. But to get our kids at the edge of their seat, interested in the educational process and understanding what their purpose is, so they can identify priorities and have a viable post-secondary plan, kindergarten through 12th grade, and invest in that, best practice around academics, they're not going to buy. So some of the things that we need to be looking at don't exist yet. But I think, to be quite honest, I think we've discovered it at CESA 2 over the last year or so.
What is it? Let's go deep. I know
You
that's a
got
big question, but I mean, for real, I mean, there is no one thing. I mean,
right.
it's like Ali said, and I've seen it. I was in a room where there were superintendents saying the exact same thing with you, Scott, um, and really, it was interesting because you saw the light bulb come on when you mentioned just do the opposite. Or, yeah, you may have that report card out there, but what else do you want to create? What do you want to put out there? Like, that's happening in your school that you're proud of. Put that on your own report card and those types of things. But yeah, no, seriously, it really, I love the doing opposite. I love, is this really working?
Yeah.
That's a self check, and that hurts. That hurts, and it has to hurt though, because then you start thinking about, okay, well, maybe my product does suck. How can I make my product better? Or service. So yeah, I'm going to go right back to it. Like what is some of the secret sauce things that you can share right now with some of our admin listeners? I think our rebel teachers, our disruptors get it, because we're going to be like, yeah,
Yeah.
let's go. I mean, we've done this, but yeah, what are some of those little pieces that you have found that, hey, this is something that is a hook that starts to work and starts to create change in your administration and ultimately in your community?
Yeah, I'll share a few things here for the price of admission, we'll say, right? Um, the I want to start out by saying this. When you lead with a product first approach, which is give me the playbook, which a ton of our educators will ask for, and just as many leadership and administrators will ask for the same thing. When you start with that, you're going to find a high level of compliance.
Hmm.
You're not going to have creativity, imagination. You're not going to have innovation. Though a lot of that does exist in our school systems, it does not exist generally around those initiatives that are driven top down.
Hmm.
So that's one of the first things that I would encourage, those that want to venture down this path, is be comfortable with not knowing, and be very comfortable when people ask, tell me what I'm supposed to do. And your response needs to be, I don't know. We have to figure that out. Because it exists itself right now in our educational system as a problem, which means we need to be innovative and approach that problem. So, number one is make sure that you're not providing, as a leadership team or as a strategic team or as those that will experiment within classrooms when others reach out, don't provide a blueprint, don't provide a playbook. Provide opportunity to let them feel and see what it is and create on their own. But that's one piece. Another is you have to take time. One of the things sweeping through our educational system in the last 5 years or so has been that portrait of a graduate. And I'm a huge believer in what that can be as a catalyst for systems change. But
Mm,
more times than not, what we find is words on paper. And
mm,
even at our state level, we create these terms, durable skill words that, we want our schools to, you know, um, incorporate in their educational system so kids exit being able to, be skilled at those, durable skills. So as a portrait of a graduate, type process, I I ask and I let districts understand that we're going to take this process over a year. And some will create a portrait of a graduate over 2, 3 months. That's still, I don't think, long enough. Why? Because what it does is it creates and opens the door for conversation around why we exist as an educational system. And it creates opportunity for those that are in the system, multiple layers, and those that are outside of our system to unify and have those deep, enriched conversations around, why do we exist? What's our purpose? What should we be doing? How should we be doing this? Because a portrait of a graduate doesn't tell you how to do it. And a lot of the times, we'll see school districts create, and even around the buzz now with durable skills, they're creating lessons around these types of skills or around the skills that are embedded in a portrait of a graduate. And to me, that's just old school, approach in the educational system. What brings the opportunities to life and the ability for our students to gain these types of skills is the explosion when you come together as a community and you create a community educational ecosystem that really allows for your business partners, your organizations, your nonprofits, your civic engagement opportunities to come in and our students to go out and be able to gain those experiences and match those types of experiences to their interests. So that portrait of a graduate is a part of our journey within our first year, or longer. We've created basically 3 phases to this framework that just kind of has evolved itself. We have not. We're close. We've got like 3 school districts moving into their third year, and phases could exist for, one phase could be 1 year, phase 2 could be the second year, but it doesn't always, function that way because every school is different. Every school is more prepared. Some need more pieces of some of the, some of the work that, that we need to apply to where they're at. But that first year is all about reculturing, and before you know it, you kind of backdoor the opportunity for some experimentation that takes place within classrooms, within your school. People start to become aware of what work-based learning should be. And it's more than just a number on a report card. It ends up being something that allows kids to, aspire towards something, build these durable skills and create that social capital within your, relational capital within your community to help with that, economic mobility down the road. So it's the evolution, and before you know it, you're going through a process, and these little pieces, what I call products, will start to pop, and you'll start to see systems change out of leaders, educators, teachers, your community members. And before you know it, you're into that second year where more people, more teachers want to, do the experimenting, or the third year for some.
hmm. For so the work that you're doing, one, it's so needed. And, part of the reason we knew we had to have you on this fall series with, educators and people in education who are innovating is because in our summer series, we had a bunch of young people tell us basically We don't know. People had already finished college. They're 20 somethings. We didn't know what we wanted to do. We didn't feel like we were prepared for the work that we're doing now, or we have no idea what we want to do. And just unaware of next steps, right? So your work in talking about like, oh, school right now can be an easy check the box. And even like this portrait of a graduate, like the work that you're talking about, a school district could try to be like, okay, we have this portrait of graduate, we checked the box. We've done this lesson on, durable skills, we've checked the box. So how do we, how does the work that you're doing really help kids find alignment in the next step that isn't just check the box? Like, it's so important that we don't just check the box, but like, what kind of drives that work and like, and really kind of gets it there? Or maybe like something that happens in the work that gets people to realize like, I'm done checking the box because I really do care about where these kids are going. And I know you're bought in, but like when you're doing this work, how do you get other people to get there?
Yeah, it's the last year has really lent itself to, some real proof of concept with educators. So, I mean, when we rolled, in our conversation last year, we didn't have the investment out of some of the educators yet. We
Mm.
had in the past, some educators trying some different things, but with the framework itself, as we move into what we consider that second phase, we look at a piloted group of individuals to move the work forward, and we try to keep it somewhat secretive, if you would. We don't want it to lean into the culture of the school as an initiative. We
Mm.
want we want teachers to voluntarily, invest in this. So it takes a lot of prepping for that, letting them know that this isn't more on their plate. This is more about just doing things differently. And I think that's really key. And as we gain that interest and investment, I call it, cognitive investment, which is the rationale, will lead you into that emotional investment that allows teachers then to say, all right, I want to try this. So we were lucky to have about 3 school districts this last year have some really great experimentation take place within the classroom. And really, they didn't see it as, you know, a great investment in career preparedness for kids in classrooms. What they really found most intriguing and what they found to be their best investment was to actually approach their classroom in what I call a Z to A approach. And that is moving away from a I do, we do, and you do type approach that every college student, I know in our state, learns as they go into their a teaching field. And ultimately, what ends up happening with which I consider that an A to Z approach, ultimately ends up putting the educator in the position of being a teacher, a content provider for students. And we're finding that that's not the investment that students want. The investment that students want is to be challenged and is to have the opportunity to be innovators themselves. So what does Z-Day look like? It's really starting with the problem. And some will say, well, this is project-based learning. And I say, no, this is much, much deeper. Project-based learning is inclusive into the classroom most times, and it does not connect students to their career readiness identity, I call it, or a community identity. It's basically their characteristics, and it doesn't serve necessarily more of a purpose personally for students. It gives them an activity that might be more engaging, project-based learning, but this profession-based approach starts with allowing kids to collaboratively work together around a profession type project that you literally involve business partners within your communities. You fictitiously create them within your classroom in relationship to something that is real world related. And you have kids work in collab teams. You have kids attempt to solve those problems by working together, and you are a hands-off approach as an educator. you're a coach, someone who guides the process, and at once in a while you mentor. And coaching is much different than teaching. And so we've had some teachers really move forward with this type of approach after we've trained and helped and supported them, letting them make a lot of mistakes. And all of our educators that have been doing this have been rejuvenated. They've found self-efficacy in themselves to actually realize, wow, students really are engaging and they can be engaging in this work. And it's just it is endless. There's just so many different examples I can give you in regards to, the student engagement, the difference. One teacher that did this had a student absent one day, and they're working in their collab teams, and the student, without being told by the teacher, showed up via Zoom with his team. And I asked the teacher, I said, "Did this ever happen when you're teaching traditionally?" And his response was, "Why would they?" It's hard to get them to show up just in general. So just the results that we've seen, the impacts that we've seen around teachers engaging in shifting their classroom has been enormous. And the other part is there is a true process for us to identify and to engage our students in them identifying their career characteristics, their community characteristics. And ultimately, that's the first process you want to go through, is allowing your students to discover themselves much, much deeper. And when they do discover that, you can ask yourself as an educator, now, how will I plan differently knowing this information? And it makes it so much easier for the educator to reinvest in that process, which is really reculturing. Now you've just shifted the culture and it becomes contagious.
I, you're speaking my language, man. I'm right
Well, I
here,
know
and
you
I'm
do it.
thinking I have like a
Yeah.
thousand stories from our students in
Yep.
our internship class. One thing I wanted to throw out at you, and just kind of get your thought process of. I love your comment about like the profile or portrait of a graduate. Is it just words on a wall, or uh, is it actually something that we do? And yeah, I've been in both of those backgrounds and districts and such. I think one thing that I was thinking about was can we get everybody to experience themselves within
Mm,
that profile or portrait of a graduate?
mm,
Experience, right? And experience doesn't mean like checkbox in a classroom. It doesn't mean me just telling you what to do. I see it all the time in internship. You came and saw it. You have to experience it. It's like me trying to describe to somebody what a roller coaster ride is rather than you just getting on the roller coaster. Same thing with Allie, like jumping out of a plane, right? I can talk to you about it and I could say this. And once you bring those community members in
mm,
and
mm.
the professionals, and we have to say that as educators, the professionals, we're not the professionals in everything. We might be really good at math, we might be really good at writing, we might be really good at, entrepreneurship, readiness, but we are not those professionals. So I wanted to kind of like, when we start to that you get a pilot that goes deep, and I think one of the key ingredients here, and what you said, Scott, is community. Bringing in community to create that and create the profile of a graduate or a portrait of a graduate, however you want to say it. It usually ends there, right? What have you seen where how you can get more of community into that ecosystem? I think we can, in schools, we get it, but then for some reason we keep talking school. We don't really talk community or talk professional outside of our bubble. So I wanted to kind of go into that. I realize in phase two of your plans, like when you have that pilot, you
Yeah.
have that initiation, but how does that spread? What kind of stories you have to say how that bleeding process just starts to go bigger?
Yeah, it is a bleeding process for sure. But one thing I want to mention is that the preparedness for our students to to embrace a system that's different. And it doesn't take long because they want something different. There is a process to that also. You have to parallel that and not jump into involving community members too quickly. Most of our educators that I work with will jump right over that first priority of kids getting to know themselves much deeper so they can make a natural connection. So they jump right over that because I think a lot of the times it's not real natural to have those conversations or figure out, ways of gathering that information. They want to use a tool, a platform to do it. And basically I say you need to do it organically. But you need to parallel that systems change within your classroom with involving more from the outside as you move forward. And that really is a comfort zone based off of the teacher themselves. Some are really going to stretch their legs really quickly, and some are going to be more cautious. But some of the things I, challenge the educators on at that first level is to say to them, how often are you communicating with your class and telling them things versus finding a different way to communicate and asking questions? You can provide steps and processes for your students. And I also say this, always have kids work in collaborative teams, always. Always have kids, your students have roles, responsibilities that meet the needs of accountability. And a lot of the times that will just naturally take care of itself. It'll solve a lot of the behavior and lack of engagement issues that you might have. But as I challenge teachers to look at what are different ways of communication and getting them to look outside the box, one of the things I'll pose to them is, how do you communicate? How do we communicate in our professional space? We're professionally preparing these students for real world. Why wouldn't we start right away? And so that could look like, instead of starting your class, you're going to send an email the night before to the collab team and giving them direction, or send a calendar invite. And in the invite, identify the tasks that need to be taken care of. Involve using Zoom or Google Meets rather than walking around and talking to students, at their desks all the time. You're going to have coaching moments, but how can you incorporate real world application within your classroom? That will allow students to get comfortable with what business partners and community people are going to be asking of them. I've seen that happen within some of these design sprints we've done within our classrooms, where we brought a business partner in who's posed, a problem for students in collab teams, and we've seen some real interesting, work done by students. But when it comes time to present, answer questions from somebody from the outside in a professional role, all of these types of things they are not comfortable with, and they'll fail quickly with it. And Peter, I'm sure you see in the work that you do, and you're dealing with juniors and seniors at that end. We did a design sprint in the Waterloo School District with eighth graders paired up with high school ag students. The eighth graders were in a math class, and we had a business partner come in and posed us with a real big design sprint project, and the students really struggled to be able to figure it out, meet really the demand and what the ask was, and without having it really kind of spoon fed to them in a way. So there's a lot of this work that needs to take place, but shifting how we do what we do in our classrooms can lend to, preparing our students for that real world opportunity and our, our community partnershiping.
I mean, it's the work that you describe. I would definitely be one of those volunteer teachers who would be like, yes, let's do this. Let's experiment. Let's like, I get excited hearing about this type of work. And what would you say? Because not everybody is like me and Peter, who's just like, let's dive deep. Let's figure this out. But what would you say is, some, for those listening, they probably are bought in, but what would be an encouraging way to approach this work with maybe colleagues or community members who are less excited about it. So how do you kind of broach the, you talked about like, you don't want it to be initiative and whatnot, but I think there are people who are on the
Yeah.
edge that just need a little encouragement to get excited about it. So how could our listeners who are taking in this podcast, maybe have a couple phrases or things you would kind of encourage them to talk about that could get people over the edge to kind of like, I want to do this. I want to experiment. I want to get out of the silo. Um, yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, when we work with school districts, we usually will hear an administrator, mention and say, just try one small thing and get started there. And sometimes that makes me cringe. Um, but you have to respect the fact that yes, our educators have been conditioned to understand that a lot of policy is to blame for our structure and what we exist in right now. So you do have to take a softer approach and coach versus, teach people. So asking a lot of questions around, what their fear might be or where do they want to start? What are some thoughts? And then
Mm,
providing, like what do you see yourself being able to do if you knew more information about your students is a big question I'll ask. If you knew what your students would, even as early as second, third, fourth grade, if you knew what they'd be good at, or we know that a lot of the times, but if you knew a direction they'd aspire to move towards and it relates to career and community readiness, what are a few things that you could adjust and do differently and not add onto your plate that could springboard you into some momentum around doing more? And so I'll pose them with a challenging question, pat them on the back. One of the things I like to think that I'm decent at is relationship building myself.
mhm,
So I'll never push on, those that are experimenting that they have to do anything. But I will prod out in front of them a little bit and try to put some great resources in front of them to get them to scratch their head and think about it. And that's the other thing I try to offer to those I work with extensively without overdoing it and that is just providing them with a lot of different information that can get them to understand the rationale behind this work and then to then emotionally invest. So
mm,
I've used your podcasts, frequently, sharing them, get our get those I work with hooked on it. There's a lot of other information out there around, around the why we should be doing this. And so that's really where we start. Once it's there's that investment, then it takes care of itself because you'll have teachers coming in to other teachers that are doing this, and then it explodes. And then they're asking you, hey, can you share that resource with me? Can you come in and help coach with me? And one of the things that I end up doing, which I think is really unique for our organization, that I don't think a lot of collaborative agencies do in the US, is, that I know of. I know in our state we don't. I literally go in and I will co-teach a class with a teacher. I will stand and coach quietly, giving suggestions to the educator as we're moving through a lesson that we've prepared together. And they really appreciate that type of support. But not everybody buys into that. Not everybody signs up for it. I'm a lonely man at the start, but once it starts off, then I get really busy.
I've never heard of that, actually. I've never heard somebody from an organization like yours come in and teach alongside, which is, again, do the opposite, right? I
Right.
think of that right away. Like, let's just do the opposite. Usually, what I'm supposed to do is come in and tell you what to do, and then you're supposed to conform and blah, blah, blah. But no, let's just experiment together. That's brilliant. And that just blew my mind because now I'm a little mad because when you came down to Naperville, you didn't really do that. So I'm a little
Yeah, next
upset.
time.
Yeah.
Next time.
Absolutely. I really really enjoy, the tough work that you do. I I know I'll say this on the follow-up episode, but it really is. I really think there's two types of educators: people who really love school and just love to conform, and people who hated it and want to jump back in and change it. I hope there's gray area in there, but I
Yeah.
feel like we're both in that area of, you know what, man, I got a little chip on our shoulder, so we're gonna go in and try to fill that chip in, I guess. I don't know. Um, but yeah, this is I mean, the work that you're doing, I got to tell you, really, to our listeners, I have worked right alongside with you. Some others, I mean, like Christy and Kevin Fleming
Yeah.
is out there, and there's just a lot of cool stuff. But yeah, Allie, I got to ask, do you have any more questions? Because she said something a little bit on the last time afterwards that
Yeah.
kind of threw
Yeah.
you in and I have
Yeah.
to put it
Did.
out there because
Did a
it
little bit.
was, I just wanted people to listen to it, but like it was like, hey, I don't know
I
about
don't
this
remember
purpose.
it. What
It
was
was
it,
the
Scott?
Oh, it
purpose.
sticks in my head.
You question like the purpose, like is that too soon? I think that's what it was. Am I
Yeah.
right there,
Yeah.
Scott?
Yeah, it was. She identified, she just questioned. I think it was
It was a
really
question.
valuable. Yeah. And be quite honest, I grew from it. I learned a little bit, thought about it, but it was, you know, do we want to hone our kids into one purpose? And really, that's not at the root of the work that we
Yeah.
do. We just want to build relevance, a system of relevance for our students. And we've had some great results. One thing I would add that I think is worth talking quickly about is we often focus ourselves on outcome type data, and that's
Mm,
prevalent and splattered all over our state report cards, and that really is what drives us to move in a product, a playbook type first approach,
yeah.
thinking we're going to shift and we're going to have success. What I like to look at most importantly is impact data. And you have to have both, don't get me wrong. But when you look at impact data, those are some subjective type things. That's where your durable skills land, right? That's where are you comfortable as an educator or someone that's working with the school system and your business partners and saying, yeah, this kid's a good collaborator? Or do we need a rubric to tell us to tell us what the outcome data really is?
Hmm.
Because, is he a 3 or a 3.5 on that? And we get hung up on that, and it drives us to really moving in a compliance type approach in our educational system, and it bogs us down.
Yep.
So I would encourage people to revision their thinking around, what would impact data look like? And more times than not, it's that evidence that our kids are literally telling us. It's the testimonials, it's the videotapes of the great work that they're doing. It's the success stories down the road when they're engaged and immersed into the great work-based learning they're doing.
Nice.
The only thing I would add there is that, people remember stories so much deeper than, whatever report came out and numerically where you are on a list or percentage points. It's the same thing with putting kids in a letter grade or a numerical scale of some kind. That's not what they're going to remember from school.
Yeah.
They're going to remember the awesome lesson that the history teacher gave about this great American history, that they just were enthralled with, or the field trip that they went on that totally changed their perspective on
Right.
this community thing. They're
Mhm.
not like those experiences rooted in community are so much deeper than any number or letter that we could ever apply to students.
I
Yeah,
think
you say it really well, Allie. And I can't leave the show without identifying what I really believe this work has accomplished in our region, our state, for those that have invested in it, that resulted in teacher rejuvenation, leading to that self-efficacy of our educators that are invested with their students, students re-engaging in the learning process, wanting to be in classrooms and wanting to be a part of it, an increase in accountability for our students. They're owning their own behaviors and really, taking accountability measures. But the other piece is just the the investment by our community partners to get engaged with our students has also been something that really has exploded and taken off. And those results are really making a difference in those school districts.
Outstanding. I mean, it really does work. I mean, I think I'm living proof of that as
You
well.
are.
Doing some amazing work, and honestly, it really, thank you for giving. I mean, you've always like taken your individual story, and we went all the way to basically, systemic change. You're doing the stuff that I wanted to do the first week I started Disrupt Education. So we
Taking some
appreciate
time.
you so much, Scott. I mean, appreciate everything that you bring to the table. How can people connect with you? I know we got some interesting things coming up. A lot of your work, like you said, is you're transforming the state of Wisconsin and beyond. So how can people connect and get a hold of you?
Yeah, appreciate you asking. Before I head there, I do want to definitely thank you and Allie for having me on. You guys do some outstanding work with your podcast. And for those listeners, if you don't know, Peter does an outstanding job with what he does down at Naperville 203. Am I getting
Yep.
that right?
Hmm.
They are very lucky to have you and your partner down there that you work with, Brett, and keep up the great work.
Thank
So
you.
really appreciate that. Well, you've had a listener or a guest on here before give out his phone number, and I'm all about that because it's in my email address line anyway. So yeah, you could text me. I would say maybe don't call because I'm not going to maybe pick up, but you certainly can text me 262-993-6343. Or you can find me at CESA2.org. You can Google me there, or you can email me at scott.carr@cesa2.org. I'd love to connect with anybody that's interested. It's one of the best things I've done in the last 3 to 5 years is to really amp up my networking opportunity with people. That's how I met you and Allie,
Mhm.
and that's what we need to be doing in our educational system.
Yeah. Let's get more of these innovative teachers out there, right, Allie?
Yes, I know. They need Scott.
Yeah, yeah. It's just get them all together and let's make some big change. Scott, thank you again for hanging out with us today. You're such an important part of this series and the work that you do. I think that is a major piece of why we had you in. And we're going to be talking with a Wisconsinite after this. So
Right?
it'll be interesting. And it's probably somebody you know, but we can't give that away right now. So,
No worries.
but thank you so much for being on for Allie Dahl. I'm Peter Hostrasser. We'll catch you next time on the Disrupt Education podcast.
Thank you for joining us on the Disrupt Education podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, we'd appreciate it if you subscribed and shared it with someone on their own learning journey. We're also excited to announce our new career coaching services, where you can work directly with Peter and Allie to clarify your path and showcase your unique value. Visit disrupteducationpodcast.com to learn more. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep disrupting education.